Let me cut to the chase up front. Here is the point of the chapter. The ultimate significance of the revelation of the eternal life of the Tathagata or the Buddha is that the eternal life truly comes to life wherever there is a bodhisattva practice, which is the content of the eternal life. Strikingly, this means that this eternal life is present when you practice a bodhisattva way. That way, your life becomes the Lotus Sutra. This sutra wants you to do two things. One, to believe in and long for your inner Buddha whose life is eternal. And two, to revive your old bodhisattva vow that you made in the remotest past and forgot today. The Buddha unendingly practicing a bodhisattva way that this chapter talks about means that it is you who have unknowingly continued your bodhisattva practice throughout the inconceivably innumerable myriads of years. What feeling arises in your heart when you embrace this all as a truth of your life? This is my take of this chapter in a nutshell. In this video, I will walk you through the chapter, but before we move on, let me say this. Saying the Buddha's eternal life may evoke an image of the presence of the godlike transcendental being, but this is not the case for the Lotus Sutra. The Buddha is not a divine being that imposes his external divine purposes onto our human life. There's no such a monotheistic-like worldview in Buddhism. This eternal Buddha in the Lotus Sutra is rather the future of you. You are a Buddha from the viewpoint of the infinitely distant future. You of now are the Buddha living her past as you. If you can fully embrace this as a reality of your life, then that can transform the meaning and value of your present everyday life. Because then you will know that you are the eternal life of the Buddha appearing as you. This is how the concept of the eternal life can open up a new spiritual stage of your life. In this sense, the whole point of the eternal life is to empower your bodhisattva practice by fully becoming who you are and beautifully blossoming in the field of your life. As we will see in a moment in the text, this is what it means to nurture the roots of goodness that is inherent to all of us. Alright, now let's dive into the text according to the order of my talk. Here's the context. The setup of chapter 16 goes back to earlier chapters. At the end of chapter 11, Shakyamuni implies his approaching death and asks his disciples in the Lotus Sutra assembly who can expound the Lotus Sutra after his departure. As a response to this calling from Shakyamuni, in chapter 15, gazillions of bodhisattvas emerge out of the earth. But there, the audience was rather confused and wondered, who are these guys, these bodhisattvas? How many years would it take to educate all these bodhisattvas? And the Shakyamuni answered, well, I am their teacher. This answer rather further confused the audience because they can't believe that Shakyamuni was able to educate and transform all these gazillions of bodhisattvas within only some 40 years of his ministry since his awakening. That's where the revelation of the eternal life in chapter 16 kicks in as an answer to this question. Early in chapter 16, Shakyamuni starts to answer this question by saying this. Since I became Buddha, I have always existed here in the Saha world, expounding the Dharma and teaching and transforming living beings. And I have also been guiding and benefiting living beings in hundreds of thousands of millions of myriads of lands in other worlds as well. Good children, during this time, on occasion I have told of other Buddhas, including lighter of lamps, and have told of their entering nirvana. All of these different descriptions were nothing but skillful means. This passage already suggests Shakyamuni's extended sense of lifespan because he says, I have always existed here and guiding and benefiting living beings in hundreds of thousands of millions of myriads of lands in other worlds. So these references imply his omnipresence in both time and space. Descriptions about his past life and other teachings such as the Four Noble Truths, impermanence, nirvana, etc., that were employed up to that point of the Lotus Sutra were nothing but skillful means. But then the question is, why did he need to teach skillful means? He says, In my desire to enable them, sentient beings, to nurture their roots of goodness, I have expounded many different teachings, employing various words and terms, parables, and examples from the past. So skillful means for the sake of nurturing the roots of goodness. This phrase is very key to understanding this chapter. Then immediately after this, Shakyamuni reveals his eternal life. He says, "A vast expanse of time has passed since I became Buddha, and this lifespan of innumerable kalpas is everlasting and never extinguished. Good children, the lifespan I gained through my long practice of the Bodhisattva way is still unending and will continue." So his lifespan as innumerable kalpas. Kalpa is a Sanskrit word that describes the longest unit of cosmological time. So the implication here is to say the inexpressibly unlimited time. This lifespan never extinguishes, it eternally continues. And he says what led to this attainment was his Bodhisattva practice. After this, Shakyamuni says, "Thus I am actually not now passing away, despite my proclamation that I will take the course of extinguishment." These are the skillful means used by the Tathagata to teach and transform living beings. Why is this? If the Buddha abides long in the world, people with meager virtue will not cultivate their roots of goodness. If they see the Tathagata as ever abiding and not passing away, they will then become complacent, self-indulgent, lazy, jaded, incapable of conceiving that he is difficult to encounter, and unable to hold him in reverence. Alright, what's going on so far in chapter 16 as an answer to attempt the enigma raised in chapter 15? So first, he says the vast expanse of time has passed since his enlightenment. And he also says his lifespan is everlasting and never extinguished. In this sense, his life is eternal. Because of this, his nirvana, his death, that will come soon, is not really the death. He uses his death as a skillful means to further transform and teach sentient beings. His disappearance, his nirvana, as a skillful means is effective because that way sentient beings who witness that disappearing Buddha's nirvana can avoid being complacent about their spiritual progress. They can keep going. But to the eyes of his audience in the Lotus Sutra assembly, this declaration was truly surprising because they believe that Shakyamuni was born 80 years ago from the time of the Lotus Sutra assembly, and some 40 years ago, that was when he was awakened to the truth. But now, he declares in Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra that that awakening was not really the origin of his enlightenment. Rather, he revealed he attained enlightenment innumerable years ago. To the eyes of the audience, this was so mind-blowing. This is how the Lotus Sutra transformed what it means to be a Buddha. That's why the eternal life of the Buddha is a groundbreaking concept. In Tiantai tradition of Chinese Buddhism, this eternal life is considered to be the life that is like the ocean of wisdom, that is an interpenetration of the three bodies of the Buddha. It is noteworthy that this eternal life's life is not talking about the biological life, but the life of wisdom, life of compassion, life of the Bodhisattva practice. What comes next in the chapter is the role of the intense human emotions. According to Shakyamuni, when people see his departure, the following will happen. All of those living beings who hear me say such things will certainly imagine the difficulty of encountering a Buddha and cherish and long for one, looking up with thirsting hearts. Then they will plant roots of goodness. Strongly focused on the presence of the Buddha that is caused by announcing his absence. So this is talking about what happens after strongly focused on the presence of the Buddha that is caused by announcing his absence. This is really intriguing to me because, Buddhism normally, I think it's easy to imagine for you as well. normally emphasizes an importance of making your feelings and emotion come to neutral and the tranquility of your mind, right? But here in this scene of the Lotus Sutra, what's going on? The opposite is rather happening, isn't it? It is rather your strong and intense moment of desiring and longing for the Buddha that encourages your bodhisattva practice. Let's try sink this in. Knowing no longer he will be around, and they will be soon missing him, stop taking his presence for granted. And this leads to making them aware that there will be no longer someone whom they can rely on, making them stand up on their own. Because of this awareness, they will finally start standing up on their own. Then the Buddha's skillful means of announcing his death ultimately serves as an enchantment of his student to stand up on their own and take over the Buddha's leadership. And the key here is the role of the intense and strong emotion. His disciples miss Shakyamuni and long for his presence so intensely, single-mindedly their mind and body are pretty much focused on his presence because of the announcement his absence. Then a surprising thing happens. Shakyamuni says in the chapter's prose part, "When their hearts are filled with the deepest longing, I then come forth to teach the Dharma. Such are my transcendent powers. Throughout the measurable kalpas, I am always on divine ego peak and abiding in all other places." So when this deepest longing occurs, missed presence will come back. But what does this mean? I think this means that someone you love and admire so much passes away. What comes with an intense feeling of missing and longing is a feeling of gratitude. That's a gratitude for many positive impacts and influences that this person made on you. So the intensity of longing is so great that the intensity of gratitude also becomes vast. Then the gratitude becomes a source of your motivation and power that flows out from you within and compels you to express. And the best way of expressing that gratitude is to take over the will of the deceased. For instance, a few days prior to my father's death, several years ago, his will for me was to take care of my mom and my sister and my wife, and to live in the spirit of the Lotus Sutra. According to him, from his deathbed, he saw that, I still remember this, the spirit of the Lotus Sutra for him is to try to understand the viewpoint of the other. That was it. That was mind-blowing in a way, and that sort of has determined the course of my learning and how I want to share with you and everyone else about the Lotus Sutra. So that's kind of the gratitude transformed into expression. With his death, I'm here right now. Without his death, I don't know what I will be doing now. So gratitude is a great source of motivation. And the question is, what does Shakyamuni Buddha, or the eternal life of the Buddha, have a wish for all sentient beings? What's the Buddha's wish? That's where the last final 3 lines of the prose part of chapter 16 reveals. So here's the Buddha's innermost feeling. He says, "How can I cause living beings to embark upon the unsurpassable way and quickly accomplish embodiment as Buddhas?" In the chapter before the beginning of this prose part, there is a famous parable of skillful physician, and I made a video about this, and let me link it below. But the point of the parable is already included in what I presented in this video. The Buddha is present for the sake of making us embark upon the Buddha way and quickly achieve Buddhahood. This is the concept of the eternal life of the Buddha, and many Buddhist Lotus Sutra based groups take this to be the focus of their devotion. But importantly, this eternal Buddha is not a transcendental divine being that is external to you. The essential aspect of this eternal life that you devote to is inner Buddha that is internal to you. The Buddha's eternal life is your eternal life that is inherent to you, to everyone else, and to any kinds of forms of lives. The eternal life that is inherent to all is everyone's Buddha nature. That's why all kinds of lives must be respected. But sadly, oftentimes we are confused about each other's true nature and accidentally hurt one another. That's why Buddhist practice is effective to reveal and understand deeply our Buddha nature that wishes for the happiness of all sentient beings. So for instance, when you punch someone in the face out of anger and later regret it, for instance, in the moment of that intense anger, what were you trying to do? You were probably trying to shake off the anger out of yourself. Then in that moment, that means you were unknowingly being kind to yourself. So that's a self-compassion. You were already compassionate, appearing as an angry person. So with that in mind, the only thing you need to do is to learn and master how to use your compassion that's always already inherent to you. Your anger proves that you're compassionate, right? Even anger is an expression of your Buddha nature. If you can fully accept this, how can we not accept and love everyone?